It's the aggression, I think, that triggered me early on. It was how rapidly that which might reasonably have been advice became coercive instruction, backed up by real slanderous, aggressive, vitriolic, shaming rhetoric. And I thought, if the people who ought to have our best interests at heart in this, if they really are doing it for our good, they wouldn't need to force it. If it's consensual and it comes from a place of love, it's a different animal than this. I thought, why am I being shouted at already? I haven't done anything wrong. I asked some questions early on. My wife and I asked questions about vaccines. All we did at the beginning was say, let's watch this, because this is all new stuff. Let's just wait and see. But waiting and see was swiftly taken away as an option. It was like fish or cut bait now. And if you don't do the right thing, we're coming for you. And the rapidity of that, how quickly it was like that, was what triggered the lizard tail in my amygdala or something. And I thought, for the first time in my life, I'm in danger here from people, and I know not whom, but I know I'm in danger. And I wasn't quite sure what to do, fight or flight, but I knew I was, and it was the first time in my life my body had ever responded. It was a real physiological response to danger. Aged 53 or whatever age I was when all this started, and I thought, I've never felt like this before, and I just trusted it. I thought, well, I have to pay attention to that, because that's coming from somewhere deep. And I thought, this is not authentic. There's something profoundly wrong here. I don't know what it is, but because I've identified it physiologically, I have to pay attention.
Yeah, I think when I hear, it's very interesting to hear your report, because of course I went through some parallel version before I even knew who you were. What you were registering was that somebody was threatening you, right? It isn't even just that there was this sudden requirement to declare a team. It was that you were being alerted that if you didn't, there were tools to bring you in line.
There'd be consequences if you didn't do the right thing.
Right. And so that was unmistakable if you were in our spot. And it's also perfectly characteristic of one of these battles. This is by far the worst one I've ever seen. But I will say the toolkit is pretty familiar. And here, let me just give you this example. Heather and I got into this because we're biologists with a generalist toolkit. We're evolutionary biologists, so we're in a position to talk a bit about viral evolution, about the interaction of a vaccine with the immune system, these kinds of issues. And so it just seemed like we had a global crisis, and it made sense to try to piece together what we were reading and make it intuitive for people so they could follow what was going on. And, there were some painful lessons early on, things that we didn't understand and came to learn, but it was an invigorating process. But I'm realizing now, as evidence emerges that we didn't have, right? And it's easy to miss these things. I don't even know if anybody's cataloging them, that the whole thing was set up not to be understood, right? So for example, the idea of an mRNA vaccine, right? You can tell me it's an mRNA and it's packaged in lipid nanoparticles, and the lipid nanoparticles pull it into cells because the surface of the cell is made of lipid, and chemically they will tend to affiliate, right? I get that. And I can intuit, okay, the mRNA gets into the cytoplasm and it's going to make protein, and those proteins are going to do something. And then I can know, okay, one of the things they're going to do, they all make spike protein, but the spike protein has been modified so that it lodges in the cell surface so the immune system can see it. That's pretty elegant, right? You could imagine that working. Here's what they didn't tell me. They didn't tell me that they had modified the RNA too, right? They modified the RNA in a way that makes it most unusual and prevents its breakdown. Now, I know why they did that, and it's a worthy experiment, but I wouldn't run it on a human, right? You wouldn't want to inject a modified RNA into a person not knowing what happens when the body is faced with this thing and can't break it down. Because what it means is that the spike protein is going to continue to be made, right? Once you discover, oh, they screwed up, they picked the spike protein, and the spike protein actually turns out to be cytotoxic, something I've been accused of spreading misinformation over, but it's very clear if you look at the actual evidence. But they've now created a template for it that won't go away in a natural form. You know, how far in are we? We're like, I don't know, 16 months in, and we discover, oh, when we said RNA, did we forget to tell you that we modified one of the nucleotides? You know, silly us. And it's like, well, we're just flying blind. You know, it's the craziest story where we have to wait to discover these things.
For me, what you just said is a perfect example for me. While you're talking and explaining, I can hold on to the understanding of the information that you're transmitting, and then when you stop talking, it starts to go away from me again. I can only hold on to it while it's actually happening. So because I'm a non-scientist and I don't have that, you know, the understanding that you have as an evolutionary biologist, I just had to go on gut.
Right.
And I would have gone on gut until something better came along, but nothing came along that made me feel confident of setting aside my initial gut reaction. On the contrary, all of the information that was coming from official sources was intensifying my feeling of threat. And because it so quickly became a slanging match, we were suddenly in the playground being bullied by big boys and girls. And I thought, this is so inappropriate. This is an emergency facing the entire world. And within minutes, the best tool at their disposal has been calling people names. If there's no credible, readily understood argument that can be made in a low, calm voice to explain to me why I ought to take a path, if it's already at the point where they just have to say, if you don't do it, I'm going to hit you. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to hit you harder. I've never got beyond knowing that that's why something is wrong. They don't have something that they can readily sell. It's not something anyone would want to buy. So they had to force it on people because there's something hinky about it. And once I realized that, once I felt that, I've never been persuaded otherwise. So it's not been scientific for me because what I would have expected from scientists hasn't been there either, unless and until I started making contact with the people that we're talking about, like yourself, like Tess, and the people that were in that room yesterday, Robert Malone and all of these other people. And I thought, oh my God, these are the clever people that understand this stuff. And they feel like me. And not only do they feel like me, they can explain to me why I'm right to feel this way. So on that basis, it's become strangely easy to remain resistant because I am persuaded that my course of action has been the only safe one.
And it is scientific. That's the thing that one of their tricks is they convinced you that nagging suspicion of yours is something other than science, when the fact is, from a complex systems perspective, with your own health on the line, being delivered something this novel, the right scientific conclusion is, I don't know if that's harmful, but I do know it's not safe. And so one of the things which is an important distinction. It's a tough one for people because they hear that and you say, these vaccines are unsafe. And what do you know that we don't? And the answer is, I know that you haven't had them long enough to know what the long-term effects are. That's why they're not safe. And so I came up with this analogy that got me in trouble early on, but I know it's the right one. All right. If you walk into a room and there's a gun on the table and you pick it up and you put it to your head and you pull the trigger and it goes click, right? Was that safe? No, it was not safe. Were you harmed? Maybe not, right? Maybe you walked away, got away with it scot-free. But the point is, you didn't know. And because you didn't know, it is by definition unsafe, right? So there's that. And then there's this other issue. Like, take the example of what they did to the availability of ivermectin, right? Ivermectin became almost impossible, in the US at least, to get from a pharmacy, which meant that they were taking pharmacists and they were getting between those pharmacists and the doctors who were writing their prescription, which means that they were not confident of their ability to compel your doctor that it didn't work. So if their point is it doesn't work and that's why you can't have it, why are you strong-arming my pharmacist and my doctor, right? You should be able to convince them. They went to school for this, right? And the point is, if you can't convince them, that's not really my problem, right? You're telling me your argument isn't any good. You're telling me in myriad ways. And the only inference I can have is that there's some reason you don't want me to have this that isn't about it not working, right? That was the implication, I think.
One of the things that upset me quite early on was when it was explained to me that the emergency use authorization was contingent upon there being no other way to go. That you could only get that emergency use authorization for that kind of global rollout of something brand new and untested if it was the only option. You know, if the house is on fire, you just have to fight it with whatever you've got, even if it's not the ideal thing. You know, you fight it with whatever you've got, and that would justify you doing some pretty extreme things. But in the case of COVID-19, there were alternatives, and if they had acknowledged, and when someone explained to me, well, if they acknowledge that there's anything at all that's already available that will mitigate symptoms and all the rest of it, they can't get the emergency use authorization. I thought, well, that's obvious then. This is clearly the explanation for why ivermectin became like trying to buy, crack cocaine.
Yeah.
It was that unavailable and it was that taboo. And I thought, well, once it was explained to me, well, they can't allow that to be there because otherwise they can't roll out the vaccines. Ivermectin, pretty much free. Vaccines, very, very expensive and profitable. You don't need to be any kind of scientist to join those two dots together and work out what's happening.
Right. I always wondered, these people who believe that this story made sense, let's suppose, just hypothetically, that you had a technology that might be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And what stands between you and those hundreds of billions of dollars is an out-of-patent drug that's so safe that you can give it under conditions of great uncertainty. You don't even need to know that the patient actually has the disease. It's safe enough to be cautious and give it to them and give it to their family because it has a prophylactic effect. If a drug you can't make any money on, that is produced all over the world, that has been given billions of times, actually worked, and that stands between you and hundreds of billions of dollars, what will that conversation sound like inside of Big Pharma? Well, do we actually expect that somebody would say, well, gentlemen, I hate to break it to you, but we have this it's a market that could open up for us. It's a huge new sector. It could transform our industry, but there is this lovely molecule and it works so well that actually there's no reason to deploy it. Do we imagine that conversation happened? I can't imagine what it would sound like.
So we've all gone through this. All the people that were in that room yesterday have all gone through that same process, more or less. And I now feel completely flame-proof from any continued attempts to persuade me by the techniques that have been being in play. The shouting at me, the name calling, the ridiculing and all the rest of it is now absolutely powerless to have any effect on me. It no longer matters what gets shouted at me by those people, what they call me. I have become somehow immune to it. And so it's almost been cathartic. I've got to the other side of something. And being in that room yesterday and talking about the shared experience with all those other people, I think, yes, we've been through something. This has been a wholly unexpected event that has affected millions of people, and it's shoveled some people in one direction and it's moved some people in the other direction. And having gone through that sorting process has been revelatory.